Hello there! Welcome to my new tutorial about traps in Dwarf Fortress. In this one, we're going to explore those 4 different types of traps. I'm going to explain how they work, how you can set them up, what you can expect from them, and how they will work for you. What I'm not going to do in this video, we're not going to talk about things like magma traps, water traps, all these indirect things that are not directly linked to these traps, and I'm not going to introduce any specific builds for these because I want to do a video exclusively with that. So with that being said, let's get started with the first thing, and that's our good old buddy, the Stonefall Trap. It's a very, very simple thing. It's just a trap made with one piece of mechanism, which you can make at the mechanics workshop, and then your dwarfs will load one boulder into it, and that's that. It doesn't do more than lobbing a boulder on the person that's walking over it. The beauty about these is they will not get triggered by your own dwarfs, and they are dirty cheap. Mechanisms can be made out of stone, and the ammo itself is really available at any point. So it's going to be one of the best early game traps that you can do, because it's literally free. But the downside about these, it doesn't one-shot enemies. It's not really a strong trap. It's, as a matter of fact, the weakest trap that you can build. But also, like you see here, it's really easy to plaster an entire place with these, and therefore you can get yourself a pretty easy defensive with that. Whenever one of these traps gets sprung, one of your dwarfs with a mechanic labor will get on over there and reload it. So all in all, it's a really good and early available source of damage if you really need it. Very good for dangerous embarkations. So the next thing on my list is not going to be the weapon trap, because as a matter of fact, I'm going to take this as the last one because it's the most complex one. We're going to talk about cage traps next. So cage traps are just placed down like that. Yet again, they need a mechanism, and once they are placed down, they will be loaded with a cage. And just like the boulder trap before, it does not get sprung by your own dwarfs. When the cage trap gets triggered, it will release a cage down on the victim, and the victim will get trapped. That's a pretty cool thing, because that means you can save your enemies from being killed. You can also this way imprison wild animals. Just keep in mind that this doesn't work for any type of enemy. When they're growing too large, like titans or forgotten beasts and stuff like that, they cannot be directly caught by a cage trap. But these cage traps, they actually can and will catch a lot of things for you, and are a pretty nice way if you want to disable enemies, or you want to, well, catch them alive for whatever reason that is. Cages must be made at either the carpenter's workshop or the smithy or the glassmaker's workshop. And if you make them out of glass, they are terrariums and can also hold fish and aquatic enemies without them dying. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get on over to the next kind of trap, and that's the spear trap. So the spear trap is a little bit different. So unlike the other traps, it is loaded with spears or menacing spikes, which can be made at the carpenter's workshop, smithy, or glassmaker. You see there's a pattern. And these can be loaded with 1 to 10 weapons. So let's do this. Let's create one of these. And this weapon is a little bit unique in that way, as it does nothing when somebody would walk over it in the first place. And it comes in 2 states: retracted and sprung. So when that thing is retracted, it doesn't do anything. The problem about it is it only does damage the moment the spears get fired upwards. So you have to think a little bit more about how to pull this off. So here, this is how it looks when it's sprung, and if you want to retract it, you can put a lever and connect it with that, and then you can crank it into the ground again, or it does nothing. So ideally, you would litter an entire place, entire room with these traps. Then you would somehow catch your enemies in a room like that, and somewhere else, somewhere safe, your dwarfs could repeatedly crank that lever up and down and impale your enemies with that. So this is a pretty nice way of killing off enemies. Just keep in mind that these traps just they will break eventually. So these weapons don't have an endless durability. But all in all, you can make really interesting trap designs with those. But just keep in mind two things. First off, when it's sprung, it doesn't do anything to walk through it, and it will also hurt your own people, so your own dwarves aren't safe from that. And as a third thing, if they're standing like that, they also act as enhancers for damage when somebody falls down on them. So these spear traps can make an awesome enhancement for any types of pitfall traps, and I leave the rest to your own devilish ingenuity. So, the last trap type that we haven't explored yet is the weapon trap. So, the weapon trap works very similar like the boulder or the cage trap. It requires a mechanism, and then it can be loaded with all kinds of weapons. The fun part about the weapon trap is it can be loaded with all kinds of different leftover weapons. As you see here, I could dump all the weapons that I don't want here into that. It can hold up to 10 weapons, and whenever the enemy now walks over this trap, all the weapons will get sprung and attack the enemy at least once before the trap, and that's the interesting part about it, will reset automatically with no dwarf involved and then fire again after a certain while. The weapon trap, though, has a 50% chance of jamming when it kills off an enemy because the thing is, here we see him in action. These traps here can, sometimes the body of the enemy just jams the trap device and then somebody needs to get on there and clean it out. But your traps can't only be loaded with leftover weapons. By the way, a really nice way of getting rid of leftover goblinite. And they can also be loaded with different types of ammo. Give me a second to find my smithy. So there is at every metalsmith's forge, carpenter's workshop, and glassmaker the tab trap components. So I want to talk about these a little bit here. So these items that we see here can all be used instead of these weapons, or you can mix and match. It's up to you. I just want to explain how these work quite quickly. So first of all, what's really important to note is these weapons are larger than the regular dwarf-sized weapon. So they all have the tendency to do more damage than just a regular weapon. The other part is they have a lower durability and they will thus break faster and need to be replaced more often. The material used reflects directly the damage, so a giant axe blade made out of wood does way less damage than one made out of iron, and so on and so forth. It's basically the same rules that apply to weapons. A steel trap part would be really majestic. So, now let's explain the parts real quick. An iron corkscrew is, by the way, also used for your pumps, but it comes with a high penetration damage. It pierces armor really well, it does a lot of damage, it attacks once, so it's really good to get through those heavily armored dudes. The iron axe, or the giant axe blade, is a weapon that hits once and really hard. It has a very, very high damage for about one blow, and is pretty good to, sever limbs and all these things, but more about that later when we compare these parts. The serrated disc, the large serrated disc, hits the enemy 3 times with a lower amount of damage, but it comes with a triple strike. So does the so does the iron ball. So the iron ball is just like the iron disc, another triple striking item with lower damage than the axe blade. And last but not least, we have the menacing spike. The menacing spike can also be used for spear traps, as it is also, basically very comparable to the iron corkscrew. It comes with a high penetration damage, works well against heavily armored enemies, which can bleed well. Right now, according to the Wikipedia where I did my research, the community is not sure whether or if the corkscrew or the spike is stronger, or if the iron disc or the iron ball versus the axe blade are stronger. It really depends a little bit on your taste, but the gist of it, what I have discovered, and I really, really would appreciate comments about that, is that those triple striking items tended to have the highest reliability of killing off enemies. It's also worth mentioning that every cutting weapon, like axe blades and those, tend to clutter the area more with severed limbs and stuff like that, whereas weapons that have more of crushing force, like the spike or stuff like that, they tend to release less clutter. But it's up to you. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the ammo of these weapon traps. So you can use either weapons or these trap items. I've talked about jamming. Now I want to talk about mechanism as a last thing in this video. So funny enough, the mechanisms do matter with all those traps. The better the mechanism, the higher the hit chance of your trap, basically. So if you ever end up with high quality mechanisms, it's pretty much worth it to put them into your weapon traps, because the gist of it is, if your trap has a high quality mechanism, like this one here, it's much harder for the enemy to dodge the attack that's linked to that. And also worth mentioning as one little tip at the end, if an enemy gets struck by a trap, they will try to respond to that as they respond to every attack. That means they will try to dodge. So if you happen to have weapon traps that are linked with pits left and right, there's a good chance that the enemy will lob themselves to death in the attempt to dodge the trap. So that's one thing you could apply there. All right, I really don't want to say that much more here. I just want to give a quick note to the pressure plate. The pressure plate is just a lever to walk over. You know, it's the same. It's a different method of linking something to get activated. It can be used quite decently with a spear trap, but I'll leave that up to you. I just wanted to mention it. It's technically not really a trap. I don't think it belongs in here. I would personally prefer it here in the Machines and Fluids tab, but it's there. I wanted to give it a mention. So I thank you for watching this video. This is pretty much the end of it. I don't have that much more to add about these. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I do plan to do a strategy video about how to use those traps, give you some ideas about builds, so that's in the making. Feel free to leave me a comment with some ideas or your own personal ingenious traps that you've built up. I know that I didn't talk about atom smashers and the usage of drawbridges, so I also plan to do a video about improvised traps in the future. So there's a lot of ideas rummaging around in my noggin. So leave me a thumbs up, leave me a subscription if you enjoyed the video, because I do daily content like that, and chances are you like the rest of the stuff as well. In the description box you'll find a link to the playlist with all the dwarf tutorials that I do. And of course, a big thanks to all the supporters out there. I really, really appreciate. And if you want to find out how you can support this channel, there's a couple of links to PayPal, Patreon, and Buy Me a Coffee. I'd be really, really happy if you'd give them a look. And if you cannot afford that, don't fret. Watching this video up to this very moment really means a lot to me and supports this channel as well. So I appreciate. I say thanks. Wish you a great time and see you soon, I hope.